You ready? All right, can call the meeting to order. I'd like to ask Maya to do roll call.
Mr. Alashewski.
Here.
Ms. Bendixson. Present. Ms. Bernal Leon. Here. Ms. Blanchard. Ms. Brown. Here. Ms. Burks. Mr. Cooley. Dr. Day. Here. Mr. Fitzpatrick. Mr. Honorado for Dr. Fuel.
Here.
Mr. Glicksberg.
Here.
Dr. Moyer for Ms. Hammer Levy.
Here.
Dr. Pershore. Ms. Kessler. Ms. Crawl. Mr. Miller. Ms. Powers. Mr. Urson for Mr. Pratt.
Here.
Ms. Vogel for Mr. Freeman. Here. Mr. Provenzano. Ms. Sussingham. We have a quorum. Just barely.
Okay, are there any changes to the agenda? There are no changes to the agenda. No changes to the agenda. Okay, in that case, we are moving to approve the minutes from the November 8th meeting.
So moved.
Second.
Action in a second.
All
Okay,
in favor?
all in favor?
Aye.
Excellent. Motion approved. Accepted. Do we have any members of the public or are there general public comments? No. Okay, moving on to the action items. We have an annual program-wide audit, there's a presentation, is that it?
Yep, as we typically do at this February board meeting, we bring the results of our audit for the prior fiscal year, which ended September 30th, 2024. Ms. Julie Davis from Rivero, Gadamer and Companies, the auditor on record for this past fiscal year, and she'll be presenting the results of the audit. So I'll turn it over to Julie.
Wonderful. Hi, everyone. I'm Julie Davis. I'm a shareholder with Rivero Gadamer and Company, and I'm pleased to be here today to go over the results of your independent audit for fiscal year 2024. I'd like to start off by thanking Ed and Jill and the entire team for all of their hard work and effort in getting us here today. It's a lot of extra work on top of the normal day-to-day duties to get through the audit process. And so I really just want to commend them and thank them for providing everything to us accurately and timely throughout the audit process. We did begin the audit work back in December, and then we met in January to go over the drafts of the financials, and really excited to be here on schedule, on time to deliver the results to you all today. And so with that, I'm going to dive right into our presentation. Starting off at the very top, first and foremost, which is the most important part, which is our opinion on your financial statements. We're prepared to issue an unmodified or a clean opinion on your financial statements. And what that means is anyone who needs to rely upon your financial statements can do so to make an informed decision. We received full cooperation from the entire team, and we had no disagreements on any accounting related matters. Our responsibilities are under generally accepted auditing standards, where our objective is to provide assurance on your financial statements that they are free of material misstatement. Our objective, I always like to focus in, is that it's reasonable assurance and not absolute assurance. And so what that really means is that we use a risk-based auditing approach and sampling and materiality throughout our audit process to determine the procedures necessary to render our opinion. Furthermore, our responsibilities are also under government auditing standards, and this is where we look at a lot of the compliance with laws and rules, regulations, and contracts at a general organization-wide level. And I'm pleased to report that was also a clean opinion for this year. And then finally, at the very bottom, our responsibilities are further under the uniform guidance, which is where we do look at the specific federal guidelines relating to your federal programs that you all receive. This year, like in years past, we've tested the National Estuary Program that you all received from the EPA. This is about $916,000 of expenditures that we tested this year. And really, when we dive into that, we're looking at specific compliance requirements on how how you're spending the funds, making sure the internal controls are there and making sure reporting requirements are met, all kinds of different, I call it the minute compliance areas that the federal government requires. And I'm pleased to report that was also a clean opinion this year with no findings. So moving on to our second page, at the very top, internal accounting controls. Internal controls are always a key component of any good organization. We do review these to the extent necessary to render our opinion, and I'm pleased to report there were no material weaknesses noted or other matters to report to you all today. As just a follow-up, last year we did have a material weakness over the financial close process. That has been corrected and there were no issues this year. And then listed there is a list of other reports. These are all the reports that are included in your audit under all of those various standards. I always like to touch on that last, second to last one there, which is the schedule of findings and questions cost. It's a little bit of a misnomer. This is really just a summary of our audit results and not necessarily a listing of findings and question cost. Those are listed there if there were any, but there are none. So it's just a summary of all of the audit results that we just went over with you today. Just some required communications. Estimates are inherent in every financial statement that's issued. These are listed here are the ones that we deem to be significant to your financial statements, which include the allowance for doubtful accounts, the FRS actuarial assumptions that are done at the state level, the fair value of investments, which are Florida prime accounts, which are also done at the state level, and then the fair value of the right of use assets and liabilities, which are related to the leases that you all have. We did conclude that the estimates were reasonable in the circumstances presented. And then on this page, as part of our standards, we're required to report to you all certain items. And this is just a high-level summary of all of those items that we're required to report to you all. First and foremost, illegal acts and fraud. We noted none throughout the audit process. I think that's the biggest thing that everyone's always looking for. There were a change in accounting policies this year. There was a new GASB, a new standard that came out on the accounting standards. It didn't have any impacts to the financial statements. And then there were no other matters to report to you all today as well. And so with that, I'm going to dive into just a quick little high-level summary of where the numbers ended for the year. So total assets this year compared to last year ended up about $174,000. This was mainly due to an increase in receivables, as you all had a lot more charges for services and contracts that were running throughout the year compared to years prior. Moving down, total liabilities increased this year about $159,000. You'll see that there was a couple different changes throughout this year. First and foremost, there's a large jump in accounts payable and accrued expenses. This was, again, mainly related to the contractors related to all of those contracts that you all have going on. And then deferred revenue also increased this year, and that was just due to timing of prepaid memberships year over year. And then finally, at the very bottom, you'll see the total net position this year. I do want to point out there was a slight error in this presentation. So prior year net position was $1,767,000 in the audit. It'll be corrected for next year's or for next week's presentation. But overall, that was just a small decline of $9,000 compared to last year, which we'll go over on the next page. And so this is a summary of the statement of activities or the income statement for the year. Overall total revenues, you'll see there was a large jump this year, about $907,000 year over year. This was all mainly in those charges for services line item, which increased about $894,000. And when we really dove in to look at that, that was just really a lot of different contracts and working with other local partners throughout the area. It was just a very, very busy year for the organization overall. For expenses, you'll see that those increased in line with revenues this year. Those are up about $636,000 or 26%. When we dive into the expenses, we really looked at probably at the natural classification level that you're used to seeing. Salaries had an increase of $122,000, and that was new staff for all the additional work of about 14%. There's an in-kind contribution related to one of the grants for $287,000. And then the largest jump is contracting and consulting, which is, again, hiring those outside contractors to assist in the research you're all doing of $275,000. Investment income rose just slightly this year compared to last year. It's in line with market conditions. One, interest rates are higher, and two, your balances are higher based on last year's interest. And so overall, that's what led to your change in net position for the year of a net loss of about $9,000. And that concludes my presentation, but I'd be happy to answer any questions you all may have.
Any questions?
Just want to mention, I want to thank Julie, her team, Lisa Leach, as well as our team, Jill Knish, for a clean audit this year. Very much appreciated all the work that goes into it in a very expedited matter of time between December and now. So thank you for bringing this audit to us today.
And then, we need a motion on the recommended action, which is recommending that the policy board accept the FY 2024 annual program audit report.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Action approved. Or action approved.
Thank you, Julie.
The next action item is the quarterly financial report from Mr. Ed Sherwood.
Yeah, let me switch over so I could show the board. Just a second. This is going to be on page 9 of your packets. Pretty much runs down the financials for the first quarter of this current fiscal year 2025. So the period from October 1 through December 31st of 2024. So you'll notice we do have an updated financial report in the packet. There was a slight difference with what was originally sent out on the 28th through our constant contact message, and there was just a correction to recognize state contracts as $75,000 rather than that being incorporated in fees and contracts, and that's related to additional funds that are coming into the program to support real-time monitoring station in Bishop's Harbor. Other than that, in looking through both the revenue and expenditures, there's a couple of footnotes I just wanted to highlight. With all of the news on federal funding pauses and everything else, you'll note that our federal grants draw for this quarter is well below what we anticipated. I did want to make note that I did draw down about $200,000 from our federal grants that were owed to us for expenses incurred to date, right before the pause went into place. Over the past week and a half, we've seen availability of those funds change. So we still have access to all the funding grants and assistance from EPA and our bill funding at this time. So just wanted to make note of that. We're not in any potential jeopardy of not being able to draw down those federal funds at this moment. So just wanted to provide that assurance to the board. The second footnote is related to expenses centered around our volunteer services. This is basically reflecting an overage over what we anticipated when we first developed our initial budget last August. This is related to actually an additional grant that came into the program. So there's additional revenues and expenditures related to that grant that's going towards incentivizing public participation in the stormwater messaging program. It's funded through a grant through the Regional Planning Council. So these were monies that we didn't plan for last August when we developed the initial budget. So I'll be coming back to the board in May with a mid-year budget amendment to reflect these new revenues and expenses. So other than that, fairly typical quarterly report. Our total revenues were about 19%. This first quarter of the program, I'd like to see that last column to be around 25% based on what we were predicting last August. So we're a little bit under in terms of revenues and expenditures at about 15% in total what we anticipated. But that's pretty typical at the beginning part of the year until we start catching up with invoices that we receive from outside contractors and vendors. So other than that, I will be happy to take any questions on the quarterly financial reports. And otherwise, the action recommended is to recommend the policy board accept this quarterly financial report.
Questions? Motion to accept the recommended action? Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. That takes us to the executive director and staff reports portion of the agenda. And next up is Ed Sherwood.
Yeah, that was the main guts of the meeting. In terms of action items, the next series of presentations are just going to be informational and discussion items for everyone to consider. So I just wanted to make note, currently the Tampa Bay Environmental Restoration Fund is open for applications for this 2025 year. The applications are due March 12th. So if you had an interest in applying for TBER funds, please get those proposals in by that date. And if you had any questions about the program priorities, please reach out to Jessica Lewis, who manages the Tampa Bay Environmental Restoration Fund. Yes.
If there's an issue with the funding, either the 320 funding or BIL, is that going to impact TBER?
No, not at all. All the funding from TBER is outside federal sources.
Thank you.
So yeah, if you had an interest in applying for TBER, get those proposals in. We have a little bit over 700,000 that we're planning for to be available for projects this year. Two more items just to give an update and get some board feedback on. We are planning to conduct a tour for a lot of our new policy board members and some of our new management board members of some of our priority areas that we're funneling a lot of resources. So trying to plan for a boat tour, probably within the whole Tampa Bay segment, to highlight projects that have been implemented and work that we need to get done in that Bay segment, probably sometime this summer. So I just wanted to throw that out there. And if you guys had specific projects or work that you're conducting that you want to highlight with this board as well as the new policy board members, please share those with both Maya and I, and we could sort of try to plan that into the tour options that we're considering.
And if you have access to large boats that we can partner with, we would appreciate it. I'm speaking with Tampa Bay Watch because I know that they have big boats for tours. Have that, and we want to provide that support, we would appreciate it.
Yep. So you'll be hearing more about this for you if we are boat poor in a couple months. The second item I wanted to mention, we're coming due for an update of our interlocal agreement, and kind of party to that is some of the strategic planning we did at the start of our last interlocal agreement update. So we have developed a strategic plan for the 2021 to 2025 period, covered 5 cornerstone strategies that are pretty relevant to the work we're doing today. But because of the changes in the board composition, we wanted to give an opportunity for these new board members to be part of the strategic planning process. So we're throwing out some options to the policy board and considering holding a joint workshop between the management board and policy board to revisit that strategic plan. Probably do that in August if there's agreement from the policy board. And basically that will feed into sort of the how we get the work accomplished that's defined in the CCMP. Like I said, our current strategic plan is still pretty relevant. We're still targeting open science using novel storytelling techniques, working in support of all your guys' activities, so using the funds that are available to us as an SRA program, and then trying to maintain core program operations through all the bumps and warts of annual budgeting processes that we're currently experiencing. So I think, again, those are all still relevant, but we want to give an opportunity to refresh that strategic plan with the new board composition. So you'll be hearing more about that probably over the next several months if we move to hold a joint workshop and getting that feedback from all the boards. As I mentioned, we are coming due for an update to the interlocal agreement. There's a 5-year sundown review provision in the current interlocal. So if no action is taken to update that current interlocal agreement, then our funding levels stay static at what is dictated in fiscal year 2026 in that agreement. So we do this every 5 years to just understand if any necessary changes need to be made. They're primarily centered around the distribution of funds to the program based on population estimates to each of the municipalities and their jurisdictional boundaries within the watershed. So I anticipate there are probably going to be some potential changes in population since the last time we did an interlocal agreement back in 2018. I think the population estimates were based on. So that might not necessarily reflect a recommendation to modify the contributions to the program over the next 5 years. So we'll be working through those conversations probably, again, starting this summer and bleeding into the fall with the goal, if there are any recommended changes, to finalize those by February of 2026 next year. That would give enough time for each of the member governments to get that adopted through their respective boards or councils, and then filed in each of the 4 counties within the Tampa Bay watershed boundary by September 30th of next year, 2026. So just wanted to give those heads up to y'all. Kind of along those same lines, Carly has developed return on investment documents that should be on your places, kind of showing the value that we hope we bring to each of your organizations for the contributions made to the program. That just shows how much funding has came in to the program for your respective organizations and how much we're able to leverage those dollars with other sources of funding throughout our organization. We also try to highlight some projects that occur within each of your respective jurisdictions on those ROI documents. And then last but not least, I just wanted to give a general update. At our November meeting, we had presentations for our Tampa Bay Stormwater Controls Project, a contractor selection. The recommendation from this management board was forwarded on to the policy board. Policy board at their November meeting decided to delay action on that contractor selection. So we were actually set to hear presentations next Friday from potentially both contractors. There's been recent exchanges from one of the contractors that I received last night. So that might change sort of the recommended process next week. But as far as, you know, our next steps of getting that contract in place, we'll look for final action from the policy board next Friday and hopefully quickly get an agreement in place with the selected contractor probably over the next month or two. This is work that I was hoping to, you know, get going on last year, but because of the selection delays, it's been pushed into this February board meeting, policy board meeting. So more to come on that, and I'll give an update probably when we go through that policy board meeting through the key actions that Maya develops and sends out after the board meetings to all the management and policy board members. So with that, that was all my directors and staff reports that we had at this time.
Thank you. Any other questions or follow-up for Ed?
Anything you'd like to convey to the policy board about tours or the strategic plan process where, you know, you all are satisfied by the existing plan? There's potential needs, it would be helpful for us to convey to the public as well. They will have meetings.
I'll give you 5 years already to do the interlocal update.
That's kind of what we've been- One of the things that we're actually talking about, ways that we could collapse the strategic plan to the comprehensive plan so that it's not like another cycle and a planning process that we go through, and it's just sort of folded in to reduce some of that burden, not just on staff, from, you know, your perspective as partners as well. I'm not sure what you all think of that.
So what is the timeline now? How is it currently said?
So the strategic plan goes through 2025, so we would need to be looking to update it. 6.
And when
It's
is
a
the
5-year
5-year?
cycle.
And then the CCMP?
The CCMP is good for 10 years, but we're required to review it every 5 years.
And the timelines are on different 5 years.
Well, we've been kind of stutter stepping them closer to lining up, which kind of creates this burden, like a big glut of planning activities all at the same time. So we have several big things coming up. I mean, Ed named 3, the CCMP update, interlocal agreement, and the strategic planning update. If you all recall, BASIS also happened in 2022. So we're looking at another Bay Area Scientific Symposium. And then we also update the reasonable assurance plan on 5-year cycles. So that also comes up with the 2027 timeframe. So really, like, all of our marquee things are hitting like the same.
Yeah, well, and that was, I guess, gonna be my follow-up. Is it even helpful to put them on the same cycle, or is it because it's a burden to do all of them, or some of them maybe at the same time? Is it better, you know, for staff, for the TBAP to space it out and always be in a planning phase on something, but, you know, maybe that's I don't know.
To give my suggestions, strategically, we think the strategic plan and the CCMP can be integrated in some way to reduce that burden. At least these other things are still probably going to be around the same timeframes of our major CCMP updates. And we'll manage those accordingly.
Are you, I'm sorry,
No, go for it.
are you contemplating just having them on the same timeline or actually integrating the documents into them?
I'm contemplating integrating them into one document, at least the strategic plan and the CCMP. I think that the CCMP is coming up. I think one of the ideas that we're working to all right now, it's very much a kitchen sink kind of approach. It's very overwhelming, particularly for the community who is supposed to be. So I think that if we incorporate strategic direction and simplify some of the things that are in the CCMP, that it could be a more effective document for us, for you all, and the community more broadly.
I mean, I think that that's a good concept.
Yeah, that makes sense to me too. I was just gonna ask how often in the past, every 5 years you have to do like an interlocal update, how often do we make broad changes to that? Or is that just, is the legwork like getting everybody to re-sign off and pay their share?
The and pay.
Yeah, the and pay, yeah.
So the original interlocal agreement was developed in 1998 and we didn't update it until 2015. And then we just updated it again in 2021. So now we're on more routine every 5 to 6 year cycle.
Okay.
And as Ed mentioned, one of the options is to just let the existing interlocal stay in place.
Right.
And then, the funding stays, your funding commitments stay level at what. There are these other factors that you might want to consider in terms of, this is the financial sustainability of the program. Whatever are. The things that have kind of driven these discussions in the past have. Is this going to be strong federal? Worried about federals? How committed are we? That this program is providing, and then also questions. Self changes where the population centers shift, as people to high growth areas. Parts of like Wesley County. Pasco County, and in the financial contribution. We're just priming the pump
Yep.
now. You don't have to decide. Just remember, we value your.
Okay. We will move on to the Technical Advisory Committee report, which, in the absence of Kelly, I think will be given by me. That's pages 11 and 12 in the packet that was provided. There's highlights on 5 technical reports and or peer-reviewed publications and links to access all of those. It also highlights 4 open science products, which I'm sure Marcus will be happy to talk to you about. And in fact, they support the State of the Bay Habitat and Water Quality, which I think Marcus is presenting on later in the meeting. So you'll learn a little bit more about those. Also highlights 8 presentations that were given, and I believe the links are active to view all of those in your spare time. Highlights some field work that has been conducted even this year, and then highlights on 6 committee meetings that occurred. I will spare you the details of all of these things because it's a lot. I will note from the Technical Advisory Committee meetings themselves, we've noticed a lot less participation in person, a lot more online participation, but that doesn't necessarily translate to actual engagement and participation. Very few questions coming from online, difficult to have conversations back and forth on technical presentations online. And so just a reminder and encouragement to send staff to the Technical Advisory Committee meetings, especially junior staff. I know when I started working in the Tampa Bay area, that was really instrumental to me in building my research program. And indirectly led to my current line of work and how I got to sit here with the big gavel today, so. Then there's really no substitute for the in-person connections that you can get at these meetings. I mean, I got direct funding as a result of meetings, met a lot of good colleagues. So I think just encouraging staff to attend the meetings and a reminder that there's no substitution for online is convenient, but in person I think would lead to more constructive feedback and engagement at these meetings. So that's my perspective on the Technical Advisory Committee.
I have wanted to share, I listed in there, a site visit to Bishop Creek, and this is the site that spans sort of City Clearwater, Pinellas, as well as City of Safety Harbor. I also attended a public meeting for their city commission. An issue that they've been dealing with for more than 20 years, and I'm sure many of you are dealing with respect to these like small creek systems, which have been receiving stormwater, that amount of changes in hydrology and the amount of the volume of water that those creeks are currently experiencing, and then the associated erosion, property loss, and upset homeowners in terms of public safety, as well as like property value, things like that. That's just one example of the kind of conversation that I think I've had with residents in every single one of your jurisdictions, called and wanted to talk about what can be done, what some of the options are. And so you all haven't been feeling. Want to let you know that it's also filtering to the Ashbury program. And we've kind of continuing to reiterate the value of the work that was done on tributary systems and how these systems can be managed using nature-based kinds of solutions, and that perhaps putting sheet pile and hardening these systems is not the best approach, and that there are alternatives, and that there are funding streams that are available to deal with that. There's unique challenges associated with all of these things, but this seems like a very timely topic. We're all seeing a lot of pressure to spend public funds to fix, in many instances, private property. So I've probably foolishly waded in with too many homeowners on this issue. I'm going to help them however I can, but this is something that you've also been grappling with, larger appetite to see if we can put together resources to help address these issues in a more holistic fashion. These stronger partnerships where it's not just public dollars on the hook for these kinds of things. I'd be very interested in working more closely with you all to see what kinds of solutions we can advance. This has been one of those things that's just been sort of kicking around for a long time, and there's a lot of reasons it's hard, and we haven't. So I'm gonna see if I can inch it forward. So I wanted to share that with you all. Well.
Thanks, Maya. Any other feedback or commentary on the Technical Advisory Committee? Okay, we will move to the Community Advisory Committee report. Yep.
I'm Megan Blanchard, there for the. We had 2 meetings since we last had the management board, and I wanted to say personally that we had a lot of really great discussion at the most recent committee meeting. There was a lot of questions about social research presentation, and it made me think I wanted to. It was really engaging. Sorry, our members volunteered 86 hours over the last quarter. Media interviews and 9 events, including the EBEP committee give a day for the Bay, which saw a lot of people come out for it. I wasn't able to attend, but I heard that people had a really great time. And it was cold. It was really cold. Yeah, it's part that. That's why. But went. And we have 34 ongoing Bay mini grant projects and
Okay. Questions, comments? Community Advisory Committee? No, all right. Moving on to discussion items then. First up is Maya.
So at the February meeting, we always bring to you a draft or the proposed new projects for coming work plan, which serves as the basis for our grant application to USDA. As I mentioned, over the past couple of years, we tried to streamline what we present to you in February, so that you're not sort of overwhelmed with the number of pages of ongoing projects that we are currently managing. So I'm really calling attention to those new projects that we're proposing for the 26th work plan. So you can see here in the packet, the description to each of those projects. You can see that we're proposing to continue our commitment to support the long-term benthic seagrass and hydrologic monitoring programs that you all are helping to accomplish. And just again, I noted this last year, but I just want to make sure you all are aware that those costs have gone up quite substantially. So that makes up a more significant portion of our technical projects budget. But we're happy to support those long-term monitoring programs, which are really crucial for us to be able to tell the story and monitor the status and trends of the bay. We have set aside about $100,000 for Habitat Master Plan implementation, and we've been working with Pinellas County to earmark those funds to support the installation of a living shoreline at Fort DeSoto near the campground area. We've also made a 5-year commitment to the Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, the Southwest Florida Water Management District, to expand the critical fisheries monitoring program into the Hillsborough River, so that we can like assess the effectiveness of the flows and levels program, as well as better understand the important tidal tributaries function for fisheries. We've for quite some time management plan looking to establish an atmospheric deposition monitoring station within the watershed. We currently estimate atmospheric deposition of nitrogen using a station that's located at the Verna Wellfield. This is in our airshed, but not the watershed. And study results from the Bay Area Regional Atmospheric Chemistry Experiment Project, or BRACE, showed that more localized data could be really valuable, particularly for understanding the contribution of mobile sources from tailpipe emissions. So the $75,000 that we're proposing is meant to be seed money to start that effort, and we're talking about at least a 2-year commitment for a total of to set up a partnership with the local air quality monitoring programs and to see if we can site and install watershed and really make progress on that long time.
You have a location in mind?
I don't, I'm planning to convene a work group and see, I suspect a good place is that traverses Old Tampa Bay, but I think what, kind of go through the process of what the technical experts end up recommending.
Last BRACE site was on the Gandy Bridge on the Hillsborough side, co-located with the EPC station. But that funding went away and it's no longer monitoring for wet and dry nutrient deposition.
And then we've also included an earmark for the technical support contractor for the 2027 reasonable assurance plan update. This is to make up shortfall from contributions that we expected to receive from Tampa Bay Nitrogen Consortium partners. It's very possible we expected a contribution from they might be able to make that payment late, but we want to make sure that we can cover the commitment that we've already made to the technical support contractor. So that's why that item was included there. And then on the community outreach and education side, we're proposing to continue our Give It to the Bay activities, to continue to create opportunities for education so that folks who might not otherwise come face to face with the Bay have those opportunities, that opportunity to follow the Bay. We plan to continue hosting the Tampa Bay Debris Derby. I'll talk a little bit more about the Tampa Bay Community Survey, what we'll do for another phase of the Tampa Bay Survey, and Ed mentioned earlier in his reports, we are we're updating our comprehensive conservation and management plan. We'd like to have some support for technical writing associated with that update process as well. So those are the major projects that we're proposing for section 320 of the Clean Water Act. This is draft at this point in time. We plan to come back to you at the May board meeting with a final work plan for your approval. So if you have any suggestions, comments, projects you'd like to see included, please let us know between now and April so that we can take that feedback and incorporate it into the full document that you'll be approving at your May board meeting. I also want to remind folks that every year we ask for those of you who have any kind project that you anticipate spending out in fiscal year 2026. If we're looking for in-kind matching expenses of approximately $211,000. We're looking for those projects that are known quantities. You know what's happening. You've already budgeted. You know the expenses are going to hit your books in 26. If you have a project like that and would like to provide that in-kind match that allows us to draw down all of the federally appropriated resources that are available to us, we would appreciate it. You can contact Ed and myself so that we can get a little write-up and get that commitment before the final work plan is developed. And then I also wanted to just draw your attention to, this will be, we typically provide a work plan also for the bipartisan infrastructure law or infrastructure jobs act projects at the same time as we do our section 320 Clean Water Act project. And so those two projects are listed here as well. From the long-term strategy that you all have approved, the remaining projects are the Hillsborough County Septic and Sewer Conversion Initiative and Cooper's Point Tidal Circulation Master Plan. I just want to note a couple of things about the bipartisan infrastructure law projects. One, this funding is uncertain whether or not it will be available to us, but we are proceeding that it will. And so that's why we're including these projects, here in this work plan. But then two, if there's changes and these projects are no longer ones that are feasible and going forward, it's important that you tell us. Yeah, we've already heard preliminary word from City of Clearwater that Cooper's Point might not be forward. Those funds might need to be reallocated to another project that addresses either the resilient wastewater infrastructure or the Tidal Creek's restoration needs that we have approved for this bill funding. So more uncertainty, but that's where things stand currently.
Yeah, I just wanted to add in relation to our work plan projects and the funding level specified there, the federal government is currently operating under a continuing resolution through March. So we factored in these funding levels for each of the projects based on level funding of the program of 850,000 from Congress. So if those funding levels change with any update of those appropriations for the federal government's current fiscal year, that would affect the levels that we reflect in our work plan, and we'll hopefully be able to finalize those numbers by the May board meeting if the budget is actually decided at the congressional level. If we see significant cuts, then we'd have to adjust accordingly. If we see additional funds, then we would adjust accordingly as well.
Yeah.
Maya, is that subject to SOAR? Do you know if that's the one in Gibsonton area?
So we wrote it up to target the areas that are currently identified as underserved. So there's flexibility, how the county is defining that, but the original idea was Gibsonton, potentially some of the town and country area as well.
The Gibsonton one's the only one I know of that's.
Yeah, and I think
We're flexible, but if you review that, like what you think's actually, that's what we would like to include.
I think Palm River is also in play too, right?
Yeah.
All right, thanks, Maya. I would now like to invite Dr. Marcus Beck to give us his vision for the state of the Bay.
Not my vision. That's what the data tell me. Good morning, everybody. I think I have about 2 hours to go through this, so we're looking good. Just kidding. So every year, beginning of every calendar year, I present the state of the Bay. And this is personally, I think this is a very exciting presentation because it brings together multiple data streams that y'all are collecting and provide to us as a program to report on various aspects of Bay health. So that's what this presentation represents. I give this to the management board, the policy board. I gave this to the technical, actually Carrie gave this to the technical advisory committee last month. So apologies if you're seeing this for the second time, but it's more or less the same. But just to, orient yourselves or you guys around how we think about these things, this is broadly showing our approach to managing water quality in the Bay and how that supports seagrass growth and reproduction. These are not the only things we care about as an estuary program. So I am reporting on other aspects of Bay health, but this is sort of our bread and butter as a program where we, focus on total nitrogen loads into the Bay, how that influences algal production, how that influences water clarity, and how that may or may not support a light environment for seagrass growth. So this is the broad guiding principle for how we manage water quality. And that translates into various management actions that are assigned to each Bay segment. So you're likely familiar with our conventional report cards, red, yellow, green, but these have management actions associated with them that based on what color a Bay segment gets, you're supposed to go out and do something about it, not just, hey, it's good, let's just, keep doing what we're doing. So just keep that in mind. So what I'm going to show you now is basically what we saw for 2024. And so looking at that paradigm, how that supports seagrass growth, the two primary endpoints we look at for water quality is going to be chlorophyll A concentration. That's basically a measure of the photosynthetic pigmentation of the algae in the water column. So think of that as correlating with algal production, and then light penetration as well. So how well light is able to reach the bottom. Seagrasses need light, so the higher those values are, the less light or light's able to penetrate to the bottom. So the outcomes here, we have the 4 Bay segments in the rows: Old Tampa Bay, Hillsborough Bay, Middle Tampa Bay, Lower Tampa Bay. Now, our outcomes, so that red, yellow, green, everything got a green this year, the exception being Lower Tampa Bay, okay? And the reason we're seeing a yellow here is because we are actually, this is just because of rounding, it looks like the same. This is what our concentration was for chlorophyll, but it was actually slightly above our recommended target for Lower Tampa Bay. And also light penetration was above our recommended management target for Old Tampa Bay as well. So that's why that one was pushed into the yellow caution category. But everything else basically got a green. And in order to go into the yellow or red categories, you have to exceed targets for both chlorophyll A and light penetration. And there's also a temporal component in there as well. It also considers what the conditions were in the last 3 years, I believe. But just because things are in green, I think, there are a couple things to note here that are informative. So if you look at the target and the concentrations for chlorophyll for Old Tampa Bay, Middle Tampa Bay, and Lower Tampa Bay, these are all above the targets for chlorophyll. So we did have some pretty high chlorophyll concentrations this year. Spoiler alert, we had some storms come through in the fall, and the stormwater runoff from those storms had an influence on the water quality. And so I'll show that breakdown of what that looks like when I show you some more plots. But for the most part, even though chlorophyll was high, it actually exceeded the targets in all Bay segments except Hillsborough Bay. The light penetration was actually below the targets for all of the Bay segments except Lower Tampa Bay, as I mentioned. So it's some interesting patterns going on here. This is showing you the same thing, but looking at the long-term historical record for all the Bay segments. This is our flagship report card: Old Tampa Bay, Hillsborough Bay, Middle Tampa Bay, Lower Tampa Bay. And then the rows are going to be the individual years. So obviously you're looking at the long-term recovery and water quality in the bay down to present 2024 here. And you can do a deeper dive into these products on some of our dashboard platforms there. We can, look at this in more detail. So this is the same thing, but showing the actual chlorophyll A concentration. So again, the measure of essentially algal production in the water column. This is the long-term record for the 4 major bay segments. And just to draw the point home about 2024 being a year where we had higher than normal chlorophyll A concentrations compared to the previous years, you can see in every major bay segment increase in chlorophyll A right at the end of the time series. So we see the jump up in Old Tampa Bay, Middle Tampa Bay, Hillsborough, and Lower. And as I noted before, all 3 of these, or all 3 of the 4 bay segments, excluding Hillsborough Bay, are above the target, the recommended target for supporting seagrass growth in these bay segments. So that solid blue line at the bottom. The other thing to note here is that the previous 2 years, 2022, 2023, were incredibly dry. So that translates to lower stormwater loads into the bay. And we saw basically good water quality leading up to the end of 2024. So you can see chlorophyll A concentrations are pretty much lower than normal until we had those storm events coming into the bay in late 2024. This is just a spatial map showing you the same thing for 2024, how that sort of breaks down in space. These are the 4 major bay segments, Lower Tampa Bay here being in the caution, that yellow category. But you can see how close these other bay segments were to bumping up into these yellow categories. So even though there are in this sort of stay the course green category, there are some instances, actually several instances, of when the station level concentrations were above that management target. So lots in Old Tampa Bay, a few in Hillsborough Bay, and upper Middle Tampa Bay was interesting as well. Even anecdotally, we, going out there, saw the water quality towards the end of the year not looking so hot in Middle Tampa Bay.
Summer in particular, it's like very visible, mixed algae blooms going
Yeah.
on.
Now, this is looking at it on a seasonal scale. So looking at the 4 major bay segments, summarizing chlorophyll by month across all the stations in those segments. This does tell the story essentially of the storms coming through. What you're seeing here is the box plots, those white boxes is essentially the long-term seasonal pattern from 1975 to 2023 for chlorophyll A by the major bay segments. So obviously we see more production during the warmer months. That's just a normal seasonal trend. But what we like to look at is essentially the current year for this state of the bay is 2024 is these red points. And basically where they fall relative to these box plots is our indication of, how this year compares to the historical record. So going from, this is a similar pattern across all bay segments, January up through essentially July, we're below that long-term seasonal concentration for chlorophyll because, as we know, historically, back in the 70s, 80s, chlorophyll concentrations were much higher. So presently we are, having good water quality. So we see those points below the medians. Until August, September, October, that's when we saw chlorophyll sort of jump up above those long-term historical conditions, again, being a function of the storms. Debbie, Adelia, or Helene and Milton. Debbie being in August, Helene, September, Milton in October. And then for the most part, the concentrations were fairly high until I think December was when things sort of calmed down again. So we see that it's actually, for most bay segments, closer to that long-term median for the most part. The other side of the coin here is light attenuation. This is just an alternative indicator we look at in addition to chlorophyll. So this is actually how well light can penetrate the water column to support seagrass. It is more or less the same story here that we're seeing for chlorophyll A, but again, just an alternative line of evidence to how water quality can support seagrass. So long-term recovery in the bay, dry years, essentially, last few years, and then in 2024, we see kind of an increase in light penetration as a function of the stormwater loads. Now, Old Tampa Bay, for years, I was, the 5 years I've been here, I've been watching these annual light penetration values increasing very steadily, almost exceeding the target here. But surprisingly, it's actually reversed the trend in the recent years, and even in 2024 continued to go down. So water clarity, at least at an annual scale, does look like it's trending towards a direction that is supportive of seagrass, which is kind of a mystery, but we know there are still some other things going on in Old Tampa Bay that make us concerned about some of the other resources in that segment. So I'm not saying that Old Tampa Bay is recovering as a whole. There's still a lot going on there, but light attenuation is an interesting piece of this to me that doesn't necessarily fit within the narrative that we're used to. This is the map of light attenuation. Again, just showing you that this more or less follows the similar patterns as the chlorophyll at the station level. So pretty high values in upper Old Tampa Bay, although there were some lower values down towards the southern part of that bay segment. Lower Tampa Bay here, we see a lot of hits of light attenuation above the target. Again, that's likely what caused it to go into that yellow category. And then seasonally, I won't belabor the point here, but this again shows similar patterns as chlorophyll, light attenuation being fairly low early in the year, and then kind of jumping up later in the year with the storms coming through. Now, the last thing I'll say about the report cards is that, the red, yellow, green stoplight, that's sort of our management interpretation of these outcomes. We also have regulatory thresholds in place for the bay, particularly as it relates to chlorophyll. And I also like to report on that because that has direct implications for our nutrient management consortium or nitrogen management consortium. That's basically it's a simpler assessment. It's just whether or not the threshold was met for a bay segment for just chlorophyll. And if we look at the outcomes for last year, we are still very much in the green, definitely in the green for the last 3 years. However, just looking at the concentrations, that long-term time series I showed you, we were very close for almost all the bay segments of not meeting the regulatory thresholds. So even though we're still in the green, I think we're sort of in this place where we are cautiously looking forward to 2025 and what that might bring, because I think we have, coming off several dry years and then these storms coming through sort of whittled away at the assimilative capacity of the bay to process nutrients as they come in. So we might not be as resilient as we have been in the past moving forward. So just that word of caution. These are dynamic systems. We also typically, at these presentations, I do provide a 2-page PDF that summarizes all of the water quality components here. It is still, we haven't finalized this yet, so I didn't print this up for today. We're still waiting on final QC data from EPC, essentially, for the water quality December values. But be on the lookout for that. That should be available in the next month or so, the final version. Now, as a thought exercise, one thing that I did this year that I haven't reported on in the past is a potential assessment of SSO frequencies in the region. There is not a easily interpretable and accessible database that provides this information in a super quantitative way. So I had to look towards an additional data set, which is a good data set, but it is one that is primarily based on public reporting of these events, and it is available, but there's a narrative description of SSOs. So you have to sort of parse that information to get an idea of how much each event, there was a potential reported volume of a spill, where it was, all that stuff. So this is a great resource. It's one that was put into place after 2016 with the large SSOs, particularly in St. Petersburg. But it does come with a lot of I guess, caveats when you're interpreting the results of this. So just kind of take these next few slides with a grain of salt. They don't necessarily mean that it's, you know, this is the exact volume of sewage that was coming into the bay. There's a lot of like, well, and then, or what else sort of interpretations with this data. So it is an estimate, and these events typically, when they report a spill, it was very often into a stormwater management pond or something like that. It's usually not directly into the bay. It's usually not raw sewage. Sometimes it is, but oftentimes it's partially treated or something like that. And a volume of it is usually recovered as well. So just because, you know, say for example, 5,000 gallons were spilled, doesn't mean that 5,000 gallons remain on the surface. So just keep that in mind. But I can't really dig into it with any more level of certainty than that. Now, the reports, it's basically, it talks about where it happened, when it happened, who the point of contact was, and a narrative description. And that's where I got this information about the volume of SSOs that was reported over time. So this is an example of what that description looks like. It's literally just somebody typing this up, but you can see there's information in there about you know, how much gallons were released, where it went, how much was recovered. So I had to go through this desktop exercise of parsing every single one of these reports, and there's thousands of them, to pull out the relevant information so I can look at trends in space and time. And keeping in mind those caveats about what these numbers actually represent or don't represent. So this is what it looked like, breaking it down by location in the major bay segments, in addition to some of the smaller ones like Terracea Bay, Manatee River, Boca Ciega Bay. You can see that 2024, of course, was an outlier in this database. So it only goes back to 2017. Again, 2016 is going to be our baseline for this, because this database was not initiated until, or wasn't made public until after the spills of 2016. And so looking at an old report that sort of summarized the 2016 events, that baseline estimate for that year is 200 million gallons. Okay, now look at the scale on this y-axis. We're up towards 90 million gallons total for 2024. So by all means, this is, you know, not a small number, but it is much smaller than it was in the past, which does represent, I think, a good investment in wastewater, stormwater infrastructure to sort of reduce these SSOs over time. But you can see where, you know, how it kind of breaks down by location. We know there were some large events in the Manatee River, and so there's a large volume there in 2024. Other places, Boca Ciega had some significant SSOs, Hillsborough, Old Tampa Bay. So pretty much across the board, coinciding with the storms. And then seasonally, just to drive the point home that these are storm-driven events, these are the monthly gallons reported in the database of 2024 from January to the end of the year. Obviously, this is when we had the storms come through, and that's when we saw a lot of those reports coming in. And so again, yeah, this is not to point the finger at SSOs. These aren't going to be the sole driver of water quality in the bay throughout the year, but they are a factor that we know are important. And really, we don't have, personally, I don't think we have a good handle on the data around these events to sort of show us where they're occurring, as well as, you know, how investments in preventing them over time have led to fewer SSOs. All right, so on to seagrass. So that's the water quality component. Obviously, one of our major endpoints as a program is seagrass, as I mentioned. I'm going to show you results for our seagrass transect surveys, which we sort of coordinate, but many of our partners, you all in the room, actually go out and get that information around 60 or so fixed transect locations around the bay. We get information on which species are there, what is their relative abundance, frequency occurrence, and we can look at this every single year. So this is just one data set where we evaluate seagrass health. The other data set, or there's a few, but the other primary one is going to be the district aerial maps from the Water Management District. So I'm just reporting on the transect data first. Now, this blue, or rather this white line, is total species frequency occurrence. Here's 2024, here's 2023. more or less the same as it was the previous year. So seagrasses looks like, at least from the Transect data, they're relatively stable. We did see increases overall in Haladuli, so shoalgrass, but maybe slight decreases in manatee grass and turtle grass. But this is, again, looking at the whole bay. So if you break it out by bay segment, you see some more relevant trends, I think. So this Old Tampa Bay, Hillsborough Bay, Middle Tampa Bay, Lower Tampa Bay, and Boca Ciega. So just again, focusing on this white line, this is total among the three major species. There are a few other out there, but these are the three major ones. Looking at 2023 to 2024, every bay segment increased in frequency occurrence. The exception being Old Tampa Bay here. So we saw an increase in 2023 and then sort of flipped in 2024 with a decrease. So this is a concern somewhat. We are overall at the bay-wide scale being relatively stable, at least in frequency occurrence. But we are seeing different trends by bay segment. So again, it does look like all of the bay segments have showed slight increases, but Old Tampa Bay is trending in a direction that we don't really want to see. So there, as I was saying, there is still something going on in Old Tampa Bay that suggests that water quality to seagrass paradigm that we know has worked in the past. There's maybe some alternative drivers of how seagrass is changing. And these are some preliminary numbers from the district aerial maps. So this more or less just confirms what the frequency occurrence Transect data is showing. This is acreage bay-wide from basically our ideal scenario in the 50s going through the 80s into present. And so you'll see from 2022 to 2024, we actually have an overall increase in seagrass acreage, about 1,400 acres, I believe. And so these data, this is like our standard for seagrass, our goals, basically. You see our coverage goal on the top here. We increased it in 2020. So we still have a ways to go, but for the most part, we didn't see additional losses with the latest round of data, which is encouraging. And these will be delivered, or these will be made available, the final numbers shortly by the district. They're still working on some final QC.
And if I can just add a note. Typically with the, kind of surprised to see a number there, but because we're still going through the QA/QC process, and we do meet with our partners, the estuary programs. This mapping cycle included both the Suncoast and the Springs Coast, and it was a incredibly difficult mapping cycle. There was unusual winter winds that made it really difficult to capture the imagery. So then a little later, we meet with our partners to ensure that what we're seeing in the imagery and our verification points match up with the transects that are collected locally, that these increases make sense or decreases make sense in those areas. So as it goes through the QA/QC process, some of those numbers may change, and the CGRAS working group meeting hasn't been set yet, but it'll be sometime between March 10th through the 12th. And that's usually when the district makes those numbers available for public consumption. So in the meantime, meeting with our partners, that exact number may change. I think we have a high level of confidence, but we typically don't put a number out. So there's not a focus on the actual acres. It's more of the long-term trends and which way these segments are headed. So, but just so everybody knows, that March meeting will typically have all of those numbers for the estuary programs. I think the Springs Coast will come later, just because we're a bit behind because the imagery capture was later in the year this time. And as no, I think Marcus already said this, but these were captured prior to the hurricanes that came through, plus the rain events and all of that. So it'll be interesting to see in the next mapping cycle what is captured and any changes. So,
Yeah. These are draft numbers. Like Viviana said, I mean, the Seagrass Working Group meeting next month will be likely when the formal numbers are released. Okay, so just some take-home points about water quality. Overall, it does for last year look like, for the most part, conditions have been good and favorable for seagrass growth. There were some exceptions. Lower Tampa Bay was in that caution category. We do meet our regulatory thresholds last year, but again, we're sort of very close. And I think for the most part, it's because we were coming off of several dry years, and so the bay had a lot of capacity to incorporate those nutrients into the water column. So I keep sort of harping on Old Tampa Bay. It's still sort of a marginal bay segment. This is where we're likely to, or the frequency occurrence data showed a decrease. So we're still looking at that, even though water quality was in the green for this year. We're still evaluating conditions in Old Tampa Bay and how to approach it from a management perspective. We have our settlement capacity project that's ongoing with the Nitrogen Management Consortium. But we're still maintaining focus on key areas that we think, in the long term deserve that attention. Couple more things as I wrap this up. I've been focusing on water quality and seagrass. Like I said, that is our bread and butter as a program, but we have multitudes of other data sets we like to report on that indicate different aspects of bay health. So this is our Nectin index. So basically our fisheries data coming from FWRI from their fisheries independent monitoring program. This is also a red, yellow, green stoplight graphic. It's just the fish have been doing great ever since 1998, never been in the red. But basically, the last couple of years, we've been across the 4 major bay segments, been more or less in the yellow. It's sort of shifted back and forth from a few of the bay segments, but as I'll show in the time series, basically this index is responsive to red tide for the most part. Or we know it's responsive to red tide, and it responds to other things, but it does show clear signals with large bloom events. So here's red tide event, and then of course in 2021 with Piney Point, there was a red tide event in July there as well. And so the fisheries community did kind of take a hit that year and is slowly recovering from that. So we know fisheries are resilient. They can recover from these HAB events, but it does take a few years. So I think what we're showing the last couple of years is basically the slow pace of recovery for the fisheries in response to the red tide of 2021. Another index we have is our benthic index, also a red, yellow, green stoplight graphic. This is a data set that's provided to us by EPC. It is a very rich data set full of biological information of all the little critters that live in the sediments that are going to be responding to various contaminants or lack of contaminants in the sediments. And for the most part, what this, looking at the long-term trend, we have Old Tampa Bay, Hillsborough Bay, Middle and Lower. Every estuary around the world follows a similar pattern. Every estuary is different, but if you look at headwaters, the sort of landward portion of estuaries, these are going to be areas that typically have more contaminants in the sediments, oftentimes legacy contaminants from organics or pesticides that have been outlawed but still occur for a long time in the sediments. And so as a result, you usually see this gradient from the freshwater portion down to the marine portion of an estuary where there's just less diversity of benthics in the sediments. So that is reflective in our graphic overall. And we do see some variation from time to time as some segments shift to others. This index does tend to be pretty variable as well. These are short-living organisms that live shorter than fish, so they are responding more rapidly in a lot of cases to changes in their sediment. But for the most part, there's generally just following that long-term historical trend. Okay, and then the last thing I want to talk about is restoration work. So I've talked a lot about water quality and what's happening in the bay itself, but we also care about habitat trends in the watershed, and also a lot of the work that's gone into restoration of our watershed. And so we also report on progress of our partners in last year. So this is a location of all of the restoration projects that were reported to us that we then report up to EPA. So green is 2024, and then gray is going to be, I think, all projects back to 1971. So We love to see this type of work happening and love to see every year that there's more and more projects being done. This is the breakdown by habitat type, native habitats, and how it breaks down by the projects. That increasing trend is always good. We love to see more projects every year. Like I said, 2024, we had a slight increase from 2023. I think that's 81 total projects last year. Typically, uplands are going to be the major focus, but some interesting trends here. You'll see this sort of magenta color. We saw, nice bump in oyster bar projects. I think the seagrass one too, right here. So Tom Reese has been busy with seagrass restoration, and that was reflected in our database. So all in all, this is a good trends we like to see in our projects reported. Now, our hope is that these projects, these are spatially specific projects. We want them to translate into broader spatial trends and native habitats in the Bay. And so we have another report card that distills land cover in a way that we can hopefully relate back to the projects that y'all are doing. And so this is actually outlined in our habitat master plan. This is a data-driven product coming from land use cover maps, as well as subtitle maps that talk about seagrass and other subtitle habitats. But these are coming from separate products. So this is coming from the seagrass maps, and this is coming from the land use cover maps that are created by the district at different reporting intervals. So this essentially is not hasn't been updated since the last time I reported on this, because we're still waiting on an update for the land use cover layer. But this is still pretty telling with the basic trends, right? So mangroves, for example, the intertidal are doing great. The arrow basically says whether we're trending towards or away from our short-term targets, 2030, and long-term goals, 2050. I think this is just targets here. So what is our target in acreage for these different habitats in 2030? And then the color basically says in any given year, has that target been met or not met? So you can look at current status or status in that year and where that trend is pointing relative to the previous year. So mangroves doing good, other intertidal habitats showing some declines. Native uplands, a lot of good trends there, but it's met, but it's trending down. Seagrasses, this is our concern here, of course, as I said. I think in 2024, we might see the arrow going the other direction, but we're still below our current target for seagrasses. So there's a lot to sort of digest with this plot, but you can get a sense of how we're doing overall, for the different native habitats. So we like to distill that even more and kind of identify habitats that we can prioritize for restoration based on these trends. And again, this plot hasn't changed from the last time we presented this work, because we're still waiting on an update of those maps. But for the most part, the key habitats we want to prioritize restoration work is based on their current status of acreage, as well as the trends, is of course seagrasses, salt marshes we're losing to mangroves, and then freshwater wetlands, which are being lost in the watershed. Other things where we're doing well, but we don't want to lose momentum, are things like oyster bars. We're actually meeting our 2030 target for those. Uplands, a lot of good work being done there, whether it's coastal and non-coastal uplands. And then finally mangroves, which are doing just fine by themselves for the time being, thanks to I think the warmer winters we're having. So don't ignore mangroves. It's just I wouldn't focus a lot of effort into these right now in terms of restoration work. There are other habitats that are in much more need at this point. Okay, I promise this is the last thing. I want to report out on a really cool event that we had last week. This is relevant to the state of the Bay because we report on multiple indicators of Bay health, but we know we don't cover them all. There are definitely priorities in our CCMP, as well as our monitoring and indicators plan that highlight instances where we know we have data available, but there's no current workflow to synthesize that information for reporting like I am to you all today. So we had the bright idea of hosting a hackathon. This was basically an open invite for anybody that has an interest in managing and protecting Tampa Bay to come and compete in teams for potentially working with us to develop an indicator workflow for something we haven't reported on in the past. So this was, we had 5 teams that were present. It was an all-day event. They were there working in teams, focusing on their particular indicators. And then at the end of the day, they had presentations where they could report out on what they were hoping to do in their workflow. So the winner of this event was a contractor, Drummond Carpenter. They focus on invasive species, and there's currently a request for quotes out now where we've invited them to submit a quote to us for the potential to actually contract with us afterwards. So we might do this again. It was a lot of fun. It's definitely a way to outsource efforts for building out these tools where personally I might not have the capacity to do it myself. Also, engaging new people that we haven't worked with in the past is always good. And it's also just a great networking event for folks that were there. Okay. That's all I got. Yeah.
Oh, thanks, Marcus. And on the last one, Hackett Bay, were the teams made up of different groups, and like whether it's students or was it all?
It was kind of across the board. You could register as a team or as an individual. And if you just registered as an individual, you're going to be paired with an existing team or as groups of individuals. But we had 5 teams. Pinellas County had a team. There was a group of students from New College, Florida that had a team. They apparently had a lot of fun, which was great. There was, and then the rest of them was Drummond Carpenter, and then there were the 2 other ones were a mixture of teams paired with individuals. So, yeah.
So if the chlorophyll and the light penetration targets were largely met over the last few years, but the seagrass coverage has not been, what's needed for the seagrass to meet the target for the increase?
$1 million question.
Yeah.
Okay.
We know they're related, but they're not always related. There's a lot of good science that supports the fact that seagrasses need good water quality and water clarity to grow. So we know that we can, to some extent, control external factors that influence water quality and clarity, with the hopes that if we do that, seagrass will come back. And historically, we've shown that in the long-term recovery of the bay. If you look at where it was in the 70s to basically 2016, we controlled a lot of the external nitrogen loads into the bay, and seagrass has recovered over that period of time. And so what we're thinking now is, that paradigm still definitely holds. Seagrasses are always going to need an adequate light environment, but there are other factors that weren't considered in some of the older management paradigms that we still use that may need to look at that. So like Old Tampa Bay, we're still seeing what looks like losses in seagrasses, but water quality is, by this paradigm, supporting seagrasses. So is it water temperature or internal nitrogen loads or something else that's driving that? And so that's what we're looking at with the similar capacity project with Old Tampa Bay. Like, does this management paradigm need a different look at it to sort of understand what's driving it? And we know there's like pyridinium blooms in Old Tampa Bay. Are those a factor that they weren't really considered when the original paradigm was conceived? So it's just,
And not just,
Yeah.
not just that. There's not an easy answer because it's a question that we need to. Marcus mentioned. One of our research initiatives, looking at how increasing temperatures in shallow seagrass meadows might be affecting seagrass reproduction and recovery. So that study is ongoing. Subsequent follow-up studies to really give us an so that we could say oh, researching that. We've also invested in research through the Tampa Bay Environment. Nutrients don't only manifest as phytoplankton in the water column, they can also become macrophytes that are out feeding in some cases seagrasses. So we've been looking at the boom and bust cycles of Caulerpa, macroalgae, as well as marine cyanobacteria that might be influencing the success of seagrasses. We've also had physical oceanographers raise the point that wave energy associated with storms can lead to erosional events that might be driving some of the losses that we're seeing. So how all of these factors then kind of come together and confound is, you know, some of the work that we've been working on teasing apart through the various lines of funding that we have available, but it's not something where we can just sort of, boom, here's the answer, do this instead. This is like the scientific method.
And I think it's also important to remember that even if all the conditions, it takes a long time for seagrass to recover. It isn't just you turn the switch and then you get back 10,000 acres. Like, it's gonna take some time for that seagrass to reproduce and expand and get back to that coverage.
Are we happy with the state of the bay?
How you guys feeling?
Can it be better?
I'm kind of interesting on like your feedback on messaging. I think we've had to tell the condition of the bay over the past several years, and we're back to seeing a lot more green on that stoplight report card, but like Amelia noted, maybe all of the things that we're hoping respond aren't responding in the same way. So we don't want to be, everything's great, and we don't want to be doom and gloomers. So your feedback on whether or not we're sort of like we're threading the needle appropriately.
I think it's important, like Marcus noted, to note that, you know, we may be in the green, but we're barely, you know, in the green in a lot of areas, most areas. So,
Yeah, I was really surprised we didn't see more yellows and reds last year, because I think that graphic I showed you.
Great.
Yeah, I mean, for a long time it looked great, but I mean, look at that jump up.
I feel a sense of urgency to like do good things and put more money in, you know, the things that St. Pete can accomplish. I wouldn't feel that way if I felt like the bay was like, oh, it's fine. We've got all that capacity. It's gonna be okay. Hurricanes can come and it's somewhat dynamic and it's all right. I don't feel like that, so.
Yeah, and I think there's.
Mhm.
That's not correct. Natural variation in the environment there, like the dry years,
Mhm.
you know, but if you consider the longer term trend, then you start thinking, oh, there's something that's not right in this bay segment or bay. The reason we're doing this is that we have multiple years where it was red.
Mhm.
Now we have multiple years where it's in the green, but we know there hasn't really been a whole lot done in terms of how we approach managing that base segment that would suggest we fixed it. So keep that in mind.
Yeah, it seems really problematic that the assimilative capacity really depended on all these dry years.
Yeah.
Like, we've been buffered from some of these impacts because of another bad thing, because we're having a drought over multiple years.
And drought is not a management strategy.
Right.
We can't rely on that. So yeah, it's complex and we're actively researching, trying to figure out the best way to move forward on these topics.
Is the Old Tampa Bay Working Group, that's not really, hasn't been meeting in a while, right?
You sort of brought it to the nitrogen management consortium as a whole. I think if there's, you know, desire for breaking that like apart again, sort of working through some of these things as a smaller subgroup, we'll be very open, you know, to that being appropriate, particularly because, you know, once we do issue a contract, an agreement to Old Tampa Bay Stormwater, Regional Stormwater Controls Project, there's gonna be a need not only to think about these things in terms of our management paradigm, but also what projects, you know, what opportunities, you know, what are the needs and opportunities to actually implement stormwater quality within that sub-basin. And so I think that's gonna take direction from a lot of this entities as well. So it's coming faster if you guys want that.
Yeah, I think the last touch point on that front, it was with individual partners representing in the Old Tampa Bay watershed, talking with both wastewater and stormwater folks, like you've experienced on this recommendation to hold the line on nutrients once again, while also trying to see what other management interventions could be implemented to get us back on track, water quality and seagrass wise. So it's getting to this yes end point where we know nutrients are a part of the equation, but there are these other factors that are controlling an expression of nutrients in Old Tampa Bay and seagrass recovery. So it's those actions that are going to need to be implemented probably to get that bay segment back on track consistently. Like Sheila was suggesting, we need probably a string of 3, 4, 5 good years in order to start seeing significant seagrass recovery in that bay segment. And that's going to take effort and investment across the board from all the partners represented in the Old Tampa Bay segment.
Well, and basic question, so on our board here, we have a few cities represented, but not Largo, Oldsmar, like, why are they not part of the board?
Yeah, that goes to signatories and partners as defined in the interlocal agreement. So all the cities, municipalities represented in the watershed are welcome to join that interlocal agreement. And that comes with a commitment to support funding for the program. The way we've traditionally involved those smaller municipalities is through the Tampa Bay Nitrogen Management Consortium. So everyone that does have a MS4 stormwater or a wastewater permit, either public or private, are party to the Nitrogen Management Consortium. And contribute to funding the reasonable assurance updates. So that's the way those smaller municipalities have contributed to our overall nutrient management paradigm. But certainly, we look forward to any other municipalities joining on to the interlocal agreement and being at the table to have these sort of discussions in this forum as well.
So do you or a partner organization report on the health of the manatee population and those metrics? Because you're asking about how to communicate it, right? Like, a lot of people don't care so much about chlorophyll A, but they care about manatees and understand the connection with seagrass very well. So is that a
The hackathon group people again. Unfortunately, we don't cite that data set, but yeah, the manatee mortality data set is basically.
So FWC has that data. And we're able to.
But this input gives us direction. Maybe this is something that we could integrate into work plan, work with FWC to develop an indicator that'd be useful to communicate trends with those charismatic megaphone.
Problem is though.
What about scallops? Like, cause I know, do you guys lead the scallop?
We partner with Tampa Bay Watch.
Did anybody look at that data to see how it corresponds with the seagrass?
Yeah, we got. There's so many indicators. I'm trying to highlight some of the main points that we've looked at over the years. You have a scallop dashboard that get our annual scallop count. Crowdsourcing effort.
This has been the challenge that's issued to Marcus, of how do you synthesize all of the different indicators? And like you're talking about, like, what's the relationship to one another, and then just reporting on them all individual standalones. So give them grace.
Yeah. And there's actually some positive news from the scallop search in 2024. This is prior to some of the significant storms. We expanded the search area this year, but we did see an increase in scallops found in 2024 in the summer, early summer.
Further questions? You still have an hour, Marcus.
I was gonna pull up the scallop dashboard. But we can move on if that's what the.
Okay, well, with that permission, then, next agenda item is the Tampa Bay Community Survey results. Maya will be presenting those.
Well,
Apologies in advance. I'm presenting on behalf of Dr. Blake Simmons, the environmental social scientist on our staff. He's flying back from UC Santa Barbara with an NC's work group that he and Carrie Flaherty-Walia are participating on. So any mistakes in the presentation are my own. Don't blame him. But I'm going to be reporting on something called the Tampa Bay Community Survey. This is something that's new for us as a program. I think we told you about it at your August meeting that we were planning on launching this survey effort. But the idea here is that most environmental problems are actually people problems, and the extent to which we can better understand the community's attitudes, beliefs, and practices with respect to topics that intersect with our comprehensive conservation and management plan, the better able we'll be to tailor our education and outreach and our projects and provide services to the community so that we can ultimately have a safe and healthy Tampa Bay. So Blake developed the questions for the Tampa Bay Community Survey. The idea is that this will become another long-term data set that just we, as well as you all, have access to for understanding these topics. We plan to issue new phases of the Tampa Bay Community Survey that are comparable to one another every 2 years. And our goal is to get a sample size of at least 1,000 folks living within the Tampa Bay watershed. So we do that through, we use a contractor to help us solicit and identify survey respondents in a randomized fashion. And we also share a version of the survey as well to folks in our network directly. And that way we're also able to make comparisons between the public writ large, as well as those folks who might have direct touch with our program and our work. So as you can see here, this is a map of where we received responses from folks in the community. We received excellent coverage all throughout the watershed, and you can see some clusters of folks that are in network in the Pinellas Peninsula, but we also received folks in Tampa in particular and all throughout the watershed. So the goal here was not only to have good comprehensive coverage of folks living in the watershed, but also making sure that we're getting a representative sample in terms of the different demographic and economic characteristics of people living in the watershed to tease out if there's any differences there as well. The survey really covers 5 key areas. We're looking to understand what they know, what they think, how they feel, what they want, and what they do. So I'm going to dive into some of the results along the lines of each of these categories from this first year's survey. So with respect to what people know, some of the questions that we asked folks, and kind of speaking to the question I posed to you all in terms of, are we striking the right tone with our message in terms of water quality in Tampa Bay? You can see here that if you look at data over a 5-year period, water quality in Tampa Bay was better today than it was 5 years ago. That's the correct answer. But not very many people answered that they thought that water quality was improving in Tampa Bay. Most people perceived it as a decline, including folks in our in-network audience as well as the public writ large. Just a side note, the public writ large is always in black and our in-network audience is always in that teal color. When we ask folks about the different, what nutrient is the biggest contributor to poor water quality in Tampa Bay, we do an excellent job in network. Folks understand that nitrogen is the primary pollutant driving productivity in Tampa Bay. But in the community, many folks view phosphorus as the biggest problem, and so there's an opportunity there. When we ask people about the main source of nutrient pollution to Tampa Bay, again, in network, folks really do understand that the primary source is coming from stormwater runoff. But in the community as a whole, they tend to think that they acknowledge stormwater, but they also include industrial discharges and wastewater as significant sources of that pollution. We ask folks about what time of year someone should avoid applying fertilizer to their lawn or garden, kind of seeing how well those messages from the Be Floridian campaign are continuing to resonate in the community. And you'll see there's still really great understanding that the summertime is not the time to apply fertilizer. And then we asked people about causes of seagrass loss, and you'll see that folks are, especially in network, understand that there's that relationship to the light environment and to nutrient pollution, but people are also sort of pulling in some of these other factors that may or may not be influencing seagrass coverage overall in the bay. And then just getting a little bit of information in terms of where people get their information and what kind of channels are most effective for reaching them. Some differences between the two sample populations. You'll see that the public writ large is much more likely to get their information from television news or social media. And our in-network respondents are much more likely to get their information from personal observations. They feel qualified, to make those kinds of assessments, or from websites directly. If we kind of graded where everybody's knowledge stacks up, you'll see there's room for improvement in terms of making sure that the community understands everything about the health of the bay. But our in-network respondents did tend to perform better than the public writ large. And the folks that are participating like in our management conference, our in-network respondents also tended to be more confident in their answers, which is sort of good and sort of bad. It's good to the extent that they feel confident, but it's bad because sometimes they're confidently wrong about certain things. And so that presents its own set of challenges for how we communicate and how we present information to address those knowledge gaps. We also really wanted to understand what people do, how they enjoy the bay. We view those kinds of things as important entry points for getting people to care about the bay and tailoring the kinds of projects and information to the interests that they have, the natural sort of interests that they align with. And so we asked people particularly about their nature engagement activities, whether it's passive or active. And you'll see that for the majority of the community, the biggest touches that people have with the natural environment typically relates to wildlife viewing and gardening or exercising outdoors. So not necessarily the things we tend to couch our conversations around. Not as many people are anglers as we might expect. That's more of a niche audience. It's an important one. But if we want really broad uptake of our messages, we might be better off thinking about things in terms of wildlife viewing, gardening, and exercising outdoors. So we thought that was kind of interesting. We also asked people about the types of pro-environmental behaviors or bay-friendly behaviors that they participate in. And so by and far, the most common pro-environmental behavior that people act on regularly is recycling their household products. So for those of you who interact with your solid waste teams, good job. I think that's a pretty strong norm in our region. But you'll see there's also some interesting things that we can dive into related to behaviors that are of specific interest to our work, related to fertilizing, lawn maintenance, watering, blowing your grass clippings onto the street, and people's willingness to install and maintain things like swales, rain barrels, those kinds of things. So you'll see that about 34% of the public blows grass clippings, not into their yard, but onto the street, which is absolutely something we don't want them doing. That has water quality consequences that we are all interested in. More than half of the public still fertilizes. And of those that do fertilize, even among the in-network, as well as the community at whole, between 25 and 30% are fertilizing in those times that they know they are not supposed to be fertilizing. And so that speaks to a particular kind of behavioral determinant that we might want to target in future campaign iterations for the Be Floridian campaign. So see here of the in-network, 24% of those people that are fertilizing in the summer, 93% of them know that that's not when they should be doing it. So I think that's a pretty interesting finding that we would never have had any information on but for this survey. And so, yeah, it'll be great to have sort of long-term look at that information. In terms of priorities and what the community wants, not too many folks actually rank the environment as their top priority once you get outside of our in-network. So you'll see that only about a quarter of the public ranks the environment as a top priority, whereas about half of our in-network audience thinks that the environment is number one.
And that's a pretty significant difference between who we talk to day to day and the rest of the folks that maybe aren't in our choir already. So if we take a big step back and look at, well, what are the things that people care about? How could we tailor our messages in ways that are more salient to the broader community audience? You'll see that there is actually some significant overlap between our in-network audience and the public when it comes to things like reducing the overall cost of living, making improvements to flood protection infrastructure, and improvements to water quality in our local rivers and ponds. These are all things that are very important to the community more generally. And perhaps if we tend to focus our messages around things like infrastructure investments, addressing flood protection, those are things that are still very desirable for the community as a whole. So the community survey also looks at some, I'll say like squishier metrics that are very interesting to get psychometric or sort of like personality type and value profiles for the community as a whole. This is an area that's evolving in social science research, but it's really cool that we have this localized data set now where we can start to look at it. So if we ask people about like their place identity, how connected they feel to Tampa Bay as a place, you'll see it's much a stronger kind of connection and identity in our in-network respondents than it is for the public. Perhaps there are reasons for that we could tease out related to migration, how long people have lived here, and that sense of connection that's associated with that. So those are things that we might study in the future to see how those kinds of variables might influence the depth of their connection to Tampa Bay as a place, and how that might vary between different types of community groups and people who engage in certain types of activities or behaviors that are of interest to the program in the CCMP. So nature relatedness. Again, this is something that people, this is how much people feel a connection not to the place of Tampa Bay, but how much they connect with and identify with nature as core to who they are. And so again, a significant difference between the public and our in-network respondents. Our in-network respondents tend to have much higher nature-relatedness scores than the public as a whole. So that means that the public might feel like much more separate from the natural world. And then we also looked at solastalgia, or the measure of emotional distress that's caused by observing emotional change within a particular place. This was a little bit more mixed in terms of the results that came through our study, but if you tease out some of the key metrics which don't interfere with one another, you can see that, again, people who know what they're looking at, so folks in our in-network are much more likely to report feelings of solastalgia or some kind of sadness for missing out on a place that once was and is no longer than folks in the general community in the watershed. There's also some interesting changes in the distribution overall. So you can see like it's very strong. It's a highly skewed relationship when you look at our in-network respondents, where it's generally like pretty a plateaued kind of distribution curve there for the public as a whole. And so these are things, that are, just kind of noting that are interesting. We don't know what's causing that, but it's something that we might want to look into in the future. Some of the things that we hypotheses that we're generating from this, this measure of hope is something that's of interest to us. So we see that the self-efficacy component of hope, so the idea that someone knows what they can do to solve a particular problem, that is something that has those that are in our network, they have much stronger sense of hope because they know what they can do about a particular problem. And the hypothesis is, well, perhaps knowing what one can do, having some hope that you can solve a problem, that might tamp down some of the negative feelings that people are reporting and some of the other metrics that are out there. But then interestingly, so while knowing what you can do, there's a statistically significant difference between our in-network and the general population. There's really no difference between those in our network and the community writ large in terms of if they have hope and belief that what they do will have a consequence for the problem that they're trying to solve. So this idea that the action that they take will have a positive effect one way or the other, there's really no difference. So people aren't sure that even if they know what to do, if they do it, that there will be an impact there. And the feelings are like pretty much the same between our in-network audience and the community more broadly. Looking at environmental justice, you'll see that typically the community broadly, there's not really significant differences between how they perceive environmental justice within the watershed from those in our network, how they perceive environmental justice. And there's also not really significant differences between how those folks that are living in underserved and overburdened communities are perceiving environmental justice. We're looking at this, I think Blake has mentioned and presented on this before. There's different ways to measure and consider environmental justice, whether it's procedural, distributive, recognitional. All these kinds of components are facets of environmental justice, and we are building these up in sort of like index up looks at environmental justice. But generally, it seems like the community, regardless of where you fall, is viewing issues of environmental justice in a similar kind of fashion. So eco-anxiety, the extent to which people are feeling distressed about the condition of environmental crisis in the area. This is something that overall the scores are low in both audiences in network and the community broadly. There are some indications that moderate and severe symptoms were more common in the general public than they were in our in-network respondents. And again, that kind of connects to this hypothesis that we're interested in about whether or not knowing what to do about a particular problem in order to solve it or affect it positively, that hope pathway might sort of tamp down some of those feelings of anxiety. And so that might be an area of future research for the program. Again, these images are just kind of showing that point that it's generally eco-anxiety is low, but you might see more of those like strong associations in the public, not in our in-network audience. So recommendations for future work, I've kind of been peppering it into this whole talk, but we kind of want to talk to how these different dimensions that we evaluate in the survey are interacting with each other. We're really interested in this idea of eco-anxiety, and we think that we could have some influence on helping people better understand those hope pathways and whether or not that helps people feel less anxious about the state of the environment here in Tampa Bay. We're also really kind of curious about things like the different predictors of environmental behaviors, especially given some of those findings related to fertilizing behaviors for people who know better but are still not doing better. And again, the whole idea, we're collecting this information. We're really excited to have Blake and a social scientist on our staff is so that we can take this information and incorporate it into our work so that our work is more effective and meaningful. So we want to help the community fill those gaps of things that they don't understand. Tampa Bay is getting better, even though there's still things that we should be concerned about. It is getting better, and we want them to know that. We want to make sure that we're using the most appropriate communication channels, leaning into things like interviews with television media, where people as a primary source of information for the general public, help people build that connection to nature, like we talked about, providing experiential education programs so that people have the opportunity to fall in love with this place and then want to work to protect it. And help us figure out different target audiences for different types of projects or campaigns that we're working on. So again, not my presentation, Blake's presentation. He would have done this much better. any misstatements. I hope that I did it justice, but I have placed at your table a summary, a little 2-pager of the results from the community survey. There's a full report that's available on the TBEP website on our library. And many of these data sets are available on our GitHub. So I know some of you and your organizations also do different kinds of community survey instruments. But if you wanted access to some of those anonymized data sets, you're consistent with our open science ethos, there are resources for you as well. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions or let Ryan bang his big gavel.
Make a comment. I really love the way the questions were designed and the way the results are displayed. It's really interesting and informative, and I'm sure you'll put it to good use.
I'll pass that on to Dr. Simmons.
I had one quick question. Was the in-network sample size, did you reach that goal? Did Blake reach that goal? Like if it was 1,000 people or more public,
It was a subset of that 1,000.
what was your end value target for that?
It's on the beginning slide.
Yeah, so for the in-network, it was a little over like 150 people. We didn't have a target sample size for the in-network. That was sort of like bonus data. 178 in-network, and then 1,062 out of network. So, yeah, for a total sample of 1,200. Yeah.
Were you able to look at anything outside the watershed as a comparison? Nationwide, other estuary programs do similar research or?
So this isn't meant to be a comparative survey from watershed to watershed. You'll see there are a few responses that are, outside of the watershed, like perhaps those people live there, but do work and interact in our program. So, there are some of those responses outside, but it's not intended to be a comparative kind of assessment.
Just to add to that, just like we're trying to build capacity for open science within the region and elsewhere, Blake is also trying to build capacity for social science. So all these tools are available to our partners and kind of encouraging them to embrace these sort of survey instruments so that we can do those comparisons, but it's not generally on us to do that outside of our watershed.
Of course, it could just help with, you mentioned messaging, how capable we are locally to message, how other estuary programs are doing as well.
Yeah, and I will be like 100% candid with you all because I don't have a different speed. But there are a lot of barriers to doing this kind of work. And so it's a testament to Ed for believing this and to Blake for persevering to make sure that these kinds of research tools are available to us. And it'd be pretty hard to go and do it for others. And I understand why others maybe aren't able to. But this is like another one of those things. If, in the past, we've talked about ways that Tampa Bay has led the way. This is another one of those examples. The only other NEPs that are doing work like this are mostly ones that are geographic programs out on the West Coast. So I'm pretty proud of this and I hope you all are too.
I think it's great for the record.
Are the questions, the actual survey, is that accessible? Because I don't remember the exact questions.
Yes, ma'am. They are in an appendix in the final full report, which is up on the website in the library. Yes, Vivian?
Yeah, this is fantastic information. Will help messaging, and certainly, the district, we have a communication section that does surveying in some areas. And what I wanted to mention is, besides giving kudos to and
It's all Blake.
the whole team in Ed, there's all Blake. The district has been discussing, well, actually, they've started a Water 101 campaign. And so this is directed to folks that are not from this area, but maybe moved to this area. And because we cover 16 counties, we can't do it in all counties and, everywhere. So they were looking to target some areas and maybe Tampa Bay being one of those first areas. And so fertilizing is going to be part of that campaign, this next effort of it. This is the second year that they've done it. Mostly it's focused on irrigation and water conservation, but certainly fertilizer is going to come into the conversation already is. So if we haven't reached out already, I did mention it to get in touch with you all, but I bring it up here so that the communication is happening one way or another, because I think there might be some benefit, of providing this to that team. Sorry, going to take it back, but they can delve into.
Is Robin who we should reach out?
Melissa Goldman, Robin can certainly direct you, but Melissa Goldman, her team is the one that's running it. But, yeah, so I think, with those campaigns coming out with this messaging, maybe there's some synergy that can happen of what we already know in this area and what is going to be helpful. Targeting those homeowners that, yeah, they know the message. Okay, well, how do we get them to act on it or to stop acting on it?
Right.
So, yeah, no, excellent work. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll definitely mention those contacts to Blake, but can you also help us make those connections so that they're lasting and we can have that sharing across agencies?
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think on the fertilizer question, because that's the one I was like, oh gosh, because we have a lot of fertilizer messaging. That's why I wanted to just look at the questions, is maybe the questions didn't quite get deep enough, like, like I use fertilizer in my, potted plants on my patio, but so I don't know if I would have answered. I was just gonna see how the questions were
Yeah.
worded to maybe try to get.
I understand what you're saying.
Yeah. Hopefully they misunderstood the question.
Hopefully.
Any other discussion items or questions for the community survey results?
Sorry, this is on it. I wanted to say something about the interlocal agreement, so if now's not the time.
No, survey if there's no other questions, so.
Yeah, I think so. Sure.
Well, I mean, it's a comment, kind of a question, but so looking at the federal grant money, right, it's about half of the expected revenue, and the time frame of the interlocal agreement being 5 years, starting a year. Right, we probably expect a lot of potential variability or volatility with that grant money, perhaps, in the future 5 years. Is that?
Yeah, potentially. We're certainly taking a look at that. Currently making a pitch for additional state funding to support that potential gap that might come into play from federal funding to each of the Gulf National Estuary programs. We'll see if that pans out. But some of the board discussion in the past, when we did revisit the interlocal agreement, was taking that into consideration. And at the time, there was a desire to build up the local funding contribution. So there's a 2.5% increase per year built into the local contributions that were creating more buffer of those local funds if our federal dollars either become reduced or go away in the future. And that helps us programmatically build up reserves. That's why when these federal funding pauses went into place a couple of weeks ago, we didn't announce to our partners to stop work like other programs have. That's because we have a diversity funding coming into the program that's not totally reliant on federal resources. So again, that's sort of the board discussion we need to have over this summer. If the board still views that as a valuable way to buffer the program versus uncertainty in federal funding in the future, then we kind of want to build that into the next interlocal agreement over the next 5-10 years.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, kind of my thought here was, given there could be a lot of variability and the interlocal agreement is a pretty static agreement for a 5-year period. I guess my question is just, how well does that serve you and your operations? And is there, the ability to consider, how to design the agreement so that it supports the program through those variable cycles?
Yeah, being a member of 28 different programs, that model is pretty unique. Where we have an interlocal agreement that defines us as an independent special district of the state of Florida. That's only somewhat available to Florida-based programs. That has given us tremendous security in terms of base funding to keep the lights on, make sure I can pay my staff consistently with all the uncertainty around federal appropriations. The one thing I would say, regardless of sort of those considerations in the past, we have great bipartisan support in Congress. Our appropriations have increased steadily over the past 10 years. We'll be presenting some of this information at the policy board. But again, we do share the concerns you're expressing over the next 5 years. That might not be the case. The trends might reverse. So we would be more reliant on non-federal sources of funding to the program in the future.
Okay. Any other discussion or commentary on the agreement?
Last thing tonight.
Last agenda item is the information items and additional packet information, which Maya will.
Quarterly progress report that's linked in there, and if you do a deep dive. You can see we're making progress on literally hundreds of projects. Feel free to reach out directly if you have any questions. Items. Our next meeting is scheduled here in this room on May 9th. Yes, I understand that the Regional Resiliency Coalition is having the summit at that same time, so please let me know in advance if that's gonna create a challenge for your attendance here. And if you won't be here in person, please send an alternate and fill out the alternate form. And I also give dance plug for the August meeting. This room is no longer available for the date prior to the August meeting. So we'll either be convening a joint workshop with about strategic planning, so that date might change, or if you are able to island in the past, I know yeah. So if you have an alternative location to offer up, please let me know for the August meeting, but our next meeting is here.
Okay, that brings us to the conclusion of the program for today, so. Meeting is adjourned.
You're great, Ryan.
So everyone.
Massive gavel.
Sending
You request
Now,
that.
like, is it going?
That was my one stipulation.